All right, this is a lecture over the respiratory chapter. This lecture is going to be broken into two parts. The first lecture is going to cover the anatomy of the respiratory system, whereas the second lecture is going to cover more of the physiology of the respiratory system and how breathing actually works. I added a little bit of vocabulary here just to help you out. I like to give you all these prefixes because even if you come upon a word that you don't necessarily know in this chapter, if you see this prefix and you know what it means, you'll get pretty far with it. All right, so the main function of the respiratory system is to conduct respiratory gas exchange by inhaling oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide. How do we get these molecules into our body in the first place? Well, all cells in the body are going to require oxygen to perform cellular respiration. Remember, that's that process of making energy, or ATP. And all cells are going to produce carbon dioxide as a waste product of that process that has to be. All right, we're going to talk about a few different ways to divide up the respiratory system. You will hear us talk about upper and lower airways, and then we'll also talk about the conducting zone and the respiratory zone. Keep in mind, these are all the same tissues and organs that we are going through. We just have a few ways that we differentiate those based either on where they are anatomically or what their function is. So this slide is going to be honing in on that function piece of it. So the conducting zone is going to physically conduct gases into and out of the lungs. The structures that are going to be involved in this are going to be the nose, the mouth, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, and the bronchi. And the respiratory zone is going to be where that molecular gas exchange actually occurs within the lungs. So this is where we're actually trading carbon dioxide and oxygen from those capillaries into the alveoli and then up and out. And the structures that are going to be involved in this are going to be our bronchioles and our alveoli. Okay, so first we are going to talk about our upper airways. We're going to start by talking about the nose, which is going to be made up of the nostrils and the nasal cavity. The nostrils are going to be the opening of the nasal passages. These are going to be lined with hair and mucus, and this helps to trap particles from the air so that it doesn't make it any further down into our respiratory system and cause issues for us. The nasal cavity is going to be the next passage. Its function is to purify, warm, and moisten the air. It does this so that lung cells do not dry out, and it does this a few different ways. So the veins in the nasal cavity are going to warm that air as the air flows past. The mucus is going to help to moisten the air and also trap outside particles. We also have ciliated cells in our nasal cavity to help move that mucus all around. And if we need it out of the nasal cavity, like once things are captured or whatever, those ciliated cells will help move that mucus towards the back of the throat to be swallowed. We're also in this area going to have olfactory receptors for smell. These are located in the upper part of the nasal cavity, and you can see the olfactory bulb there in the diagram. We talked a little bit about this when we had our lecture on senses. We're going to have a few related structures to this area that your book is going to talk about. We have nasal folds, which are going to increase the surface area in the nasal cavity to help pull more of that gas in. We're going to have the hard palate. That's going to be the roof of the mouth. It's going to be supported by bone, and it's going to separate the nasal and the oral cavities. We will also have the soft palate. This is going to be at the back of the mouth. It is not going to be supported by bone, and it ends in the uvula, which is the little dangly thing that you see in the back of your throat. And we also have sinuses. These are going to be hollow chambers in the skull. This helps to lighten it, and they're also going to contain mucosal cells. Here is a diagram of what this looks like next to a cross-section of an actual skull and head so that you can see what those structures would actually look like. Next, we're going to get into the pharynx. This is also known as the throat. It is a passageway that is shared by both air and food. It's also going to contain our tonsils. Remember that lymphatic tissue that we talked about last week? It is going to be divided into the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. And you can see those go right in order, just like that. After that, we get to the larynx. This is going to be the upper portion of the trachea. This is going to route air and food into the correct passages. We have a little bit of hyaline cartilage on this area that is frequently referred to as the Adam's apple. It also is going to contain our vocal cords, so we sometimes call this the voice box. In the larynx, we're going to have the glottis, which is going to be the opening of the trachea, and it is going to be covered by the epiglottis when you swallow. The epiglottis is going to be a flap, which is going to cover the larynx to keep food out of the trachea, because it's really bad when we get food in the trachea. We refer to that as aspiration. And here is a little video that shows how this all can happen. So you'll see the epiglottis kind of popping out and covering this up and just kind of plopping it down into the esophagus. Our vocal cords are going to be membranes that are kind of stretched across the glottis. These vibrate and produce sound, and this is how we are able to make all of the sounds that we make with our mouth. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the lower airways. So the trachea is going to be the first part of the lower airways. It is going to be the pathway to the lungs. It's going to have cartilaginous rings to help keep it from collapsing during the pressure changes from breathing. You will hear this colloquially referred to as the windpipe. And this area is going to be lined with ciliated mucosal cells. These are going to trap particles and move them up and out of the respiratory tract. So if the mucus in our nasal passages does not catch all of the particles, and a few of them do make it down into the trachea, these ciliated mucosal cells help bring those particles back out and get them out of the way. Next, we are going to get into our bronchi. We're going to have right and left tubes that this splits into. They're going to divide off the bottom of the trachea and into the lungs. The right is going to be a little bit wider, shorter, and straighter than the left. And keep in mind, the reason why these are arranged a little bit differently is because we're making a little bit of room for the heart, right? Okay, so bronchioles. Now, remember, bronchioles are where we start getting into the conducting zone, right? These are going to be these little bitty branches off the bronchi, which eventually end in the alveoli, or the little air sacs that are actually going to have capillaries that wrap around them and help us do our gas exchange. So the alveoli, again, are going to be at the very end of these bronchioles. They're going to be little microscopic pouches where gas exchange actually occurs. There are millions of them that can be found tapering off the ends of the bronchioles. They're going to be made up of a single layer of epithelial cells, which is going to allow easy diffusion of oxygen into capillaries and CO2 out of capillaries. They're going to be found in little clusters that look kind of like grapes, known as alveolar sacs. And then these sacs are going to be surrounded by capillaries, and that is how that gas exchange is able to occur over that surface. After this, we will get down into the lungs. These are going to be the organs of respiration. So they're going to allow the body to inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. They're going to be divided into lobes. The left lung is going to have 2 lobes, and the right lung is going to have 3 lobes. And again, that asymmetry of the lungs is largely due to the heart needing to sit a little bit over on the left side. So let's talk about pleural membranes. Whenever we did our dissections, a lot of you got to see this. So we're going to have serous membranes that are going to be separated by a fluid-filled cavity that are going to kind of encase the lungs to help create a tight connection that will allow the lungs to move within the chest without creating friction. The visceral pleura is going to cover the lungs. The parietal pleura is going to line the rib cage, and the pleural cavity is going to be the space in between them, and it's going to contain a little bit of fluid to help cut down on that friction. Let's talk a little bit about the diaphragm. This is going to be the primary muscle of respiration. It is this large dome-shaped band of muscle which separates the thoracic and abdominal cavities. it helps us to create the pressure and volume difference needed in the thoracic cavity, and that is what allows the lungs to expand and compress. And we will talk a whole lot about what this process looks like on the next lecture. The last bit of muscles that we're going to talk about are going to be the ribs and intercostal muscles. These are going to be the bones and muscles which help to form the thoracic cavity and protect the heart and lungs. So these actually allow the thoracic cavity to kind of change size, and this also helps to create a pressure and volume difference, which is going to allow the lungs to draw air in and push it back out. So a couple different muscles that all work together here to allow gas exchange to occur. That is all that I have for lecture 1. Stay tuned for lecture 2, where we will learn more about the physiology of breathing.